My name is Nicole Grabow, and I am an objects conservator with the Midwest Art Conservation Center based in Minneapolis. I'm here at ATALM presenting on creating supportive inserts for baskets. I wanted to share with you a few ideas that I have used for working with baskets that needed supportive inserts, keeping in mind that every basket is different and each basket will require kind of fine-tuning these methods. So these are just to give you some suggestions and kind of a jumping off point for your own creative thinking. I also want to mention that not all baskets need an insert. So the first step with any project like this is to take some time to look at your basket, to examine it, and to determine whether or not it would benefit from a supportive insert and if it's stable enough to handle the kind of manipulation that's necessary when you're making an insert and using an insert. Supportive inserts can be great for helping baskets that have a lot of flexibility to maintain a single shape and to prevent them from slumping. It can also be good for evenly distributing weight across the surface of a basket so that it doesn't concentrate it on a few areas, which can then become vulnerable to stress. So I'm going to start with the simplest one, which is just a ring. And I'm going to use for this backer rod, which looks like this. It is polyethylene, which is an inert material, and it can be used on its own, or it can be wrapped to make it look white. It's usually gray. It comes in a couple of different thicknesses. This is the thicker one. I think it's about 1 inch in diameter. I've got a thinner one here as an example. I usually end up using the thicker one, but it's nice to have a few different sizes on hand. So what I would do, the first thing I would do is determine the diameter that I'm looking to create the support for. It can be used on the interior of a lid to help to distribute weight, on the interior of the body to help keep a form in a circle, or outside the basket on the bottom to prevent it shifting on a cart. So we'll say that I know my diameter, and then I use a letter opener to cut my foam. And when I'm cutting it, so I'll measure out my distance, and we'll say it's about yay long. When I'm cutting it, instead of cutting it straight across, I'm going to cut at an angle. And what this does is it makes it easier for me to really customize my distance. Baskets are not the same all the way around. And in this way, when you go to bring your ends together, you can kind of fudge a little bit and make it a little bit wider or a little bit smaller because of the angle that you've cut it at. So at this point, I would use just a drop of hot glue on one end and press it together, and it will create a ring like this. The ring can then either be put inside the basket, inside the lid, or on the outside, and it creates a nice support. You can cover these rings with a material that I really like called soft Tyvek, and I have some here to create a white surface, which might be a little bit nicer for display. But it's not necessary. This is an inert material, so it's fine to have it in contact with your basket. So that's the simplest form of support that I will make. Another kind of support that you can make, and this is great for a solid-sided basket that has a wide opening, like a column. And it's a support that goes on the interior and helps to support those sides all the way up and keep its shape. And what I'll do is, again, I'll measure the diameter, and then I will draw that diameter on a piece of foam. So right now I'm just drawing a circle as an example. And then again, using my knife, I start by cutting a square. And then I'll shave the corners off. It's hard to get ethafoam in a circle, but you'll find that it's not absolutely necessary for it to be completely round. You can see that my shape is far from completely round, but we can continue to modify this so that it'll work just fine. What I will do now is I will actually cut it in half. So I have two pieces, and I'll cut a section out of the middle. What this enables us to do is because baskets are not a uniform shape, and because the materials themselves are quite fragile, we don't want to spend a lot of time kind of cutting and taking in and taking out and fitting, because we're gonna be handling our basket more than we need to. So when you create two halves to your insert like this, then you can use a wedge like that, and with it inside your basket, you can push the wedge to open these two halves out so that it's pressure fit, custom for your basket. Now what I would do before this step is I would actually cover this, because the scratchy edge of the ethafoam is a little bit too abrasive for the basket. I like to cover mine with soft Tyvek, and you can do this without any gluing or sewing by just cutting a little slit and then taking your piece of soft Tyvek and tucking it in and pulling it taut. This piece is a little too small, but you can see we could wrap it all the way around and tuck it in on the other side too. And then you would have a nice smooth surface which would go against your basketry materials on the inside. And the next one that I'll show you is a simple pillow. So to make a shape like this, which you can use for a variety of different things, you start out with just a square of the soft Tyvek. And then I've started this already, but you measure the diameter that you want, and then add, I would say, at least a ½ inch to that diameter to give yourself kind of room for sewing and also for, to take up the curve of the padding. You might even want to add more than a ½ inch. And then I'll draw the circle on the Tyvek just with pencil. Now I have two pieces of Tyvek here, and I've put these, you'll notice with the soft Tyvek material that it's smooth on one side and it's just a little bit fuzzy on the other side. So I've put the smooth sides together because those are the sides that we want facing our basket material. But we'll sew it inside out. So I draw my diameter circle on the outside and then I sew around it. I've used black thread here because it's easier to see, and you can see I've almost completed the sewing, but I'm going to leave a little bit of an opening here. And then you can trim this up to make it a little bit neater. You don't want to go too close to the stitching. And I've hand sewn this. You can also use a sewing machine if you're making a bunch of them and you want it to go faster. I like hand sewing. Keeping your opening on one side, now that you've got your circle sewn, you can just separate these edges and turn your pillowcase inside out. Like so. And then we fill the inside with an inert batting material. I use polyfill, fiber fill, to make it as stiff or as cushiony as you want. And then continue to kind of fold these edges in and sew them shut from the outside. You can make these in large and small sizes. You can stack them, and you can use them to fill up the insides of baskets. Now, the third one that I wanted to show you is a support for a basket that is narrower at the top than it is at the bottom. These baskets can, at first, seem a little daunting to try to create a supportive insert for, because you don't want to put something larger than will fit through the top opening, yet you want to take up that wider space at the bottom. So the first method, which is kind of quick and dirty, this uses a little bit more fabric. Sometimes you need to kind of make one or two to get the right size. I don't have a formula for figuring out the dimensions. You just have to sort of eyeball it. But you make yourself a nice big circle with your soft Tyvek. And then I have folded over the edge about an inch to create a channel for a drawstring. And I've sewn that around the perimeter, so you can see that. And then I've inserted this piece of string, this is just cotton embroidery thread, as a drawstring. Now you feed a drawstring through by attaching a safety pin on one side and feeding the thread through. And then when we've got the thread through, you take both ends and you pull your drawstring to create a little pouch. And this little pouch compresses really nicely, so you can stuff it into the narrow opening of your basket, and then once it's in there, you can put your batting inside. And you can stuff it in so that the corners are nice and snug, not too tight, not so much pressure that you're going to damage the basketry material, but enough so that you give it the support that it needs where it needs it. So you can see this soft Tyvek compresses really nicely, but it does use a lot of material to create a relatively small shape. You can see how if you had a much larger basket, you would need to use a much bigger piece. So in order to be a little bit more efficient with our Tyvek and to make something that's customized just a little bit finer, there's a modification of this pattern right here. Now this one requires some measuring. The principle is the same. It's a drawstring bag that you put inside your basket and then fill when it's inside, but it's tailor-made to the dimensions of your basket. So here you can kind of see what it looks like. It has a little bit more shape to it, a little bit less puckering of the material. Now this is essentially 3 pieces of Tyvek. I measure the diameter of the bottom of the basket, and that becomes this circular piece here. Then I measure the height of my insert, which is this distance right here. And then I have 2 more measurements to make. I have the diameter at the widest point of the basket, and this goes here. This is wider than the foot. And the final measurement is the height of that width, which here is about 2 inches. And what you then do is, using those dimensions, you create a polygon that is shaped roughly like this. This is your diameter at the bottom. This is your diameter at the widest point. And this here is your height at the widest point. You cut out 2 of these and sew them together. And they end up being these 2 pieces on the side here. So once you have the sides sewn together, you can sew the bottom in place. Again, I've done this with black thread. Hopefully you can see it. So here's my side seam. And then when the side seams are in place, sew the bottom to it. Sewing the bottom on is a little bit tricky. I did this one on my machine, but honestly, it's a little easier to do it by hand because the fabric has a tendency to pucker up. And you do the sewing inside out, and then create your drawstring edge. Turn it right side out, soft side on the outside, smooth side on the outside. Pull your drawstring taut, and there you have a little receptacle for your batting, which can provide a nice support for your baskets.